Let's go!
All right. Welcome everybody to another CanJS Widgetry, the third. With me is Chasen.
Hello.
Hey, Chasen. Today I'm excited. We have what I think is probably, well, actually I know by far the most advanced guide or recipe that I've put together on the CanJS website. It's got drag drop. It's got authentication, signing in and out with Google's APIs, and you can create YouTube playlists. So let's check it out. Woo! All right. So it's up as of yesterday, although I'm still making a few modifications to it, and we're about to release a 3.8 that makes a few little things a little bit easier. I just realized I'm showing localhost, not canjs.com. So if you're on canjs.com, you can go to guides and you can go to recipes. Yep. And then you can see playlist editor. So this is what we're going to be doing. I have this playlist opened right here. And this is the functionality that we're going to build. So you can sign in to Google. Sign in as me. It says, welcome, Justin. I could revoke access or I could sign out. I can search for videos, maybe CanJS videos. Shows you videos, and then I can drag and drop them onto this drag videos here. And this is sortable, so I can put it where I want. And also notice that if I don't drag one on, I have this nice little animation where it returns to where it belongs. And then when I'm fully ready, I can create a playlist. So this I'll do CanJS videos. Disabled while it's being created. And then if I check my YouTube account, I did this with my personal account, so it's going to be a bunch of, oh, I don't think I can sign out right now because I'm streaming with YouTube.
That might be a little risky.
Yeah. Take my word for it that it created the YouTube. Maybe at the very end of this, I'll attempt to sign out and go to my YouTube account, or I'll just switch to the CanJS account and create playlists there. So this is what we're going to build. I'm going to. This guide isn't going to walk through like step by step as complex as the guide. What I really want to do is just give an overview of how this works. I am going to build it up in the same way the guide does, but I'm not going to go through like all of the minutia of every single step. So with that being said, I am going to start at the place that the guide starts, which is this basic HTML. So you could see this is basically static HTML that like a designer might give us with what the button should look like, what the input should look like, what the loading videos should look like, the two different playlists, and what the placeholder when you're hovering. It should be this green color, and the create playlist button. And this is the HTML here. Just basically for the most part, it's two ULs, a source UL and a new playlist div with a UL that is sortable on it. And then each video is an LI with an anchor that takes you to the video and an image, a thumbnail image, and the text. And then there's a create playlist button. So pretty simple. The first thing that I'm going to do to get started is I'm going to set up the Google client. So Google has this API. If you look at like YouTube API, you search for that. They have this YouTube data overview. What you need to communicate with YouTube services is you need to kind of authenticate your app first, or you need to get API tokens and a client ID for your app to be able to actually communicate to YouTube. There's a lot of different steps that this page walks through. I've already done all of those, and if you go through the guide, it has all of that in there. So the first thing I'm gonna do is get that going. I'm gonna put in what needs to be there, which is the first thing I want to kind of do is load. Lost my mouse. There it is. I would just want to load Google's API, and I'm going to have it call Google script loaded when it's complete. So this loads Google's JavaScript API, and then once that's loaded, I needed to do a whole bunch of other things to fully authenticate this application. So that's this script here. Basically, you can see I want when Google's loaded to be represented by a promise. So what I'm really doing is I have this Google script loaded callback function that I'm setting to fully load what I need from Google, authenticate my app so it can actually make requests on behalf of Google. And then when all of that's done, I want to resolve this promise. I like promises. They're a good way of communicating when asynchronous things have been done. So I'm creating a promise here that completes once Google is fully done.
Hey, Justin, quick question. In the bottom script where you have the unload, why do you set this .unload to an empty function and then call Google script loaded?
So I'm guessing this is what Google suggests to do.
Okay.
So my guess, my interpretation of this is that different browsers support different sets of onload versus on ready state change. So this is to make sure if like onload gets called, it's going to clear before on ready state change. It's going to clear onload so nothing happens. It's not going to call Google script loaded twice.
Right. That makes sense.
This is just a way I think that probably works for all browsers to get a single function called when the script is loaded.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Good question, Chase, and that's why you're here.
Thank you.
So the next thing I want to do is I'm going to load jQuery, which we'll be using because mostly we want jQuery++. jQuery++ is a Done.js project. I'm zoomed in considerably here. It has a bunch of additions to jQuery. Useful for us in this project is its drag and drop custom event handlers, and we'll be using those. The next thing I need is CanJS. I'm loading CanAll, mostly because CanAll comes with jQuery, CanJQuery, which can hook into jQuery's event bindings and use custom events written with jQuery. So I've got CanJS plus CanJQuery. That's really what I need here. jQuery++ and jQuery. So with that, I've got this promise that's going to be resolving. I'm going to also create the basics of the app that I want. I'm going to get rid of this default HTML. I'm going to create my template, my view for my application. And what this does is it's basically, I want to know when Google's API has loaded. So I'm just going to show loading Google's API while the Google API loaded promise is still loading. And then I'll say loading while it's loading and loaded once it's finished. So I'm going to set up the basic kind of JavaScript app where a basic a basic CanJS application is mostly just a view model and a view. I've got my view already. I just need to create a view model that's going to have Google API loaded promise in it and make that accessible to the view. So I'm going to define a playlist view model, which is this. So I'm extending CanDefine, and I'm going to say, hey, it's got a Google API loaded promise property that is the Google API loaded promise. I'm going to create an instance of that view model. Then I'm going to load my template. Okay. And then I'm going to do the standard run the template with the view model, call the template with the view model to get the live bound document fragment back and insert that into the page. Now that I've done all of that, hopefully, you can see loaded, and it goes loading to loaded very quickly, but it is working. Okay. Woohoo! Woohoo! So now I need sign in and sign out working. So Google has an additional, so even though Google has loaded, I need to actually request from Google this ability to know whether someone's signed in or signed out. So there's kind of this other API tucked inside of the actual Google API. We'll see what that looks like in a second. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change my view to match, to kind of look like what I want it to look like that deals with signing in and signing out. So here's what I want. I want, if someone is signed in, to say, hey, welcome, that person's first name. If they click the sign out button, it's going to sign them out. I'm going to call this Google Auth. This is Google's API, and call sign out. And then if they're not signed in, I want to write sign in and call Google Auth sign in. So really what I care about in my view model is I'm going to have this signed in property that is going to manage whether someone is signed in or not. So the way that I'm going to do this, I'll already say, isn't the way that I would do this now that define map event streams, or define, what is it? Can define stream Kefir exists. I would use event streams for what I'm about to do. I'll explain it later, but this is a way that you could still make it work with 3.0, even without using streams. So like I said, the important thing is we need a signed in property to represent whether someone's signed in. So I can just make a signed in property. But we want to know if someone's signed in. And the way we can know that is we have to wait till the Google API is loaded, and then we need to get this Google Auth object. And that has a API that lets you know if someone's signed in. So I'm going to get that Google Auth object on my view model like this. I'm using the asynchronous getter syntax so that when my Google API has loaded, I can read Google. When we loaded Google's script, it actually puts this GAPI object on there. But when you load other parts of the GAPI, it adds other utilities on it. So once everything's fully loaded, we can get this auth instance that is this Google Auth thing that we can call sign in and sign out. And it can also let us know whether someone is signed in or not. So this is kind of the tricky part. I'm going to go a little bit, like I said, old school CanJS. I'm going to have an init function that's going to listen to changes when Google Auth becomes, there's actually a value there, and then use that to listen for when someone's signed in or signed out and update kind of manually this signed in property. So that would look something like this. So basically, I'm going to listen for Google Auth to be set. When it's set and I get the Google Auth object, Google allows us to know whether we're signed in like this. So I'll set the signed in property. You can also listen with Google if someone is signed in like this. Is signed in, listen. I'm going to do this kind of thing. Again, I would not do this I would use event streams here, and I would convert all of this stuff to an event stream and then make signed in a event, like basically a defined by a stream. The reason is because this is not memory safe. If this playlist view model were like a components view model, it's setting up its own listeners on Google Auth and it's setting this listener in Google Auth as well, these would not be cleaned up. You would have to make sure you've got some special functionality in your control that is going to, or your component that is going to tear these bindings down. If you use Kefir for streams, that happens automatically. Another way is you could convert this to a compute, and you could use a computed property. That would work as well. But just setting up bindings like this yourself, just be aware that it's dangerous, but it's okay for this app because there's only one view model.
Will the next version or the next update to the guide show the stream way?
I don't know. I've been thinking about that. I definitely put notes in the guide to like tell people about this and warn them and say, hey, what you should do is check out the previous guide I made, the weekly or the weather widget, which does introduce streams. I just, for this, didn't want to teach people streams also.
Gotcha.
It's just too much to learn.
Yeah.
For one session.
Cool.
So the next thing I want to do is make sure I get that given name working. Google has a kind of very long way of getting the name from the user. This is, once I have the Google Auth property, I can use it to get the current user, get their basic profile, get their given name, and now I should have, welcome Justin. All right, I should be able, I'm already signed in because I was using the app over here, but I should be able to sign out and automatically, because we're listening on Google Auth, we were signed out automatically. Then we can sign back in. And it automatically knows, it pushes the signing in to this client. So that's why it's nice that you listen to it this way. And we're good to go. Hooray. Awesome. So the next step is getting it so we can search for videos. Again, I'm going to update the HTML, because this is actually how I think a lot of times when I'm writing this stuff. Is I always think like, okay, what do I want the rules for my page to be? How do I want it to operate? And then I make my view model fit that. So I want to have an input element that's connected, that's doing two-way bound to a search query property. So as I type in this input, it's updating this search query property on my view model. And then I want to get I'm going to get a promise for the list of matched videos that I'm searching for. And while those videos are coming back, it's nice to show the user that we're loading them. So I'll be getting the search results promise. And while that is pending, it hasn't resolved yet, I want to show that my videos are loading. And then once they are resolved, I'm going to want to go through and list each video. This does. So once our promise is resolved and has a value, I'm going to go through every search result value, so every video basically, and I'm going to list out the YouTube video, like a link to the video with a thumbnail inside of it, YouTube's default thumbnail. This is like YouTube gives, basically I'm going to have each video object that YouTube gives back. There's an ID with a video ID, which is how you make its URL. And then there's a snippet with its title, also has thumbnails. And so I'm listing all of those. So to implement this is the kind of thing that I think anybody who's been using CanJS for a while has done 1.5 million times. I'm going to have a search query property that is a string. It's going to start out as the empty string. And then I'm going to have a search results promise that when search query is more than 2 characters, it's going to use Google's API or YouTube's API, whatever you want to call it, to go make that request. So here, actually, I can change this now because this is working. So here I can, when the search query is greater than 2 characters, I'm going to ask for, this is how you request YouTube videos that match a search query, saying I want to search their snippet for videos. It gives me a response. This response object that it gives back has a result property that has also a items property, which are the actual videos. So I'm just mapping my promise to a new promise that resolves to the list of items. And then that's what I'm using. That's what I'm returning. So with that, I should be able to search for CanJS videos. Hooray!
Woohoo!
All right, cooking
Nice.
with gas now. So the next thing I want to do is I want to make it so that I can drag these things around. Fortunately, that's really easy with jQuery++, and jQuery++ was, created by the same mind that created CanJS, so they naturally work pretty nice together. jQuery++ has a drag init event, and you can just listen to drag init events just like you can click events, and then it just suddenly makes what you're doing draggable. So what I want to do is, I wonder if I can actually do no function, but I want to make each one of these LIs draggable. I wonder if I could just do without even a function, drag init. Does that work?
Good question.
Let's see. It does. Okay.
Dang.
So that basically says, by listening on the drag init function, it just makes whatever's there draggable. But I want to, on drag initialization, I want to be able to configure it. So I'm going to configure this to call a video drag. Now, the drag init gets called, this event handler gets called with different events, or sorry, different arguments. So like the first argument is the event object. The second argument is like this drag object that we can use to configure things. So I'm actually, using the special keyword arguments, which gets you your arguments that the event was dispatched with. I want to get really the second argument. That's why I'm putting it in 1, zero-based indexing. So I want to pass this drag object, which we can use to configure stuff. So in my JavaScript console, I'm going to do video drag. And I get the drag object here. And here I can configure its behavior. So I'm going to configure it. So instead of dragging the object around like it was doing right now, I don't want to remove the item because I'm not removing from the results of search, the search results. I want to configure that to like do what's a ghost. Basically, copy this object and drag around a copy of it. That's easy with jQuery++. I can just call this ghost, and then I get that element, and I can do whatever I want to with it. I can change it around. In this case, I just want to add a different class name, so the ghost looks a little bit different than the item that you're dragging. So now if I look for ghosts, ooh, scary. Okay, so that's how to set up dragging. Now, I'm about to update the guide so that you actually will use a helper here. I'll register a stash helper and call to that. I think that's a better practice than having these kind of things in the view models. I tend not to like having my view models have to know anything about the DOM. And this is kind of DOM related or explicitly DOM related here. So if you are watching this and the code's a little bit different in the future, you're doing the right thing. The next thing I want to do is set up dropping. So I want to make like a little drop point here. And then as I drop videos onto it, they get added to the first item in the list. So again, let's focus on what we want the HTML to be like. So only when I have search results do I really want to show that you can a drop point, and only if you actually have a search results length, right? So only if, so I've got search results, the promise resolved, only if you actually found a video, does it make sense to show the little drop point playlist element. So that will have a UL in it. And what I want to do is I'm going to go through the rest of this. What I want to do is I'm going to go through a list, kind of a composed list that's composed of the actual videos in the playlist that I've already dropped and possibly any placeholder. What I mean by that is it's good practice to like keep your kind of stateful items separate and compose them. So if I've got a this kind of video that I'm dragging here, I don't want to have to insert that into the actual list of playlist, the actual items that are really in the playlist. Instead, I want to kind of keep it its own state. Like, what is the placeholder and kind of where does it belong within the list as its own thing, never really mutating the actual state of playlists until I've actually done the drop. But I want to be able to, I actually need to show, of course, a list that does have the placeholder in it. So that's going to be this composed list that composes the actual items that are currently in the playlist with, if we have a drop, a placeholder, that drop placeholder, combine it with that drop placeholder. So that's what I want to loop through. I will have an actual list of playlist videos, and this is just composing that. So it's just going to go through each of its items, which are, this is going to be an array of objects that have a is placeholder property if it's actually the placeholder, and it'll put placeholder on the class name so it can get styled differently. And then everything will have a video property, which is actually the video placeholder or not, so that I can go through that video's information and list it. And then if we don't have any placeholder or video, then I can show, hey, drag video here to let someone know to drag the videos there.
Makes sense.
Sweet. So what, now a tricky part for this, one of the hard parts of this is I need to somehow tell this drag, I need to label and basically say our event system only knows about elements, right? Drag init, we're going to start listening to drop events here. It only knows about elements that are being dragged. It knows nothing about the actual scope of what's going on here. So what we need to do is associate drag data, we need to associate the scope data, the actual video, with this LI, so that when that LI is dropped on this UL, we can look back up the video and add that as a placeholder or add that to our actual list of videos. So we can do that. The way you do that is there's a CanJS helper that works very much like jQuery data, where you can say, hey, I want to take whatever the scope here is, which is each video that we're looping through, right? You can control it. It's basically, this is a shorthand. I don't have to write this. It assumes the current context if you don't have this latch argument. Whatever the current context is, I want to save that on this LI as kind of a virtual drag data property. It's a virtual property because we actually do it so that it's memory safe, where if the element gets removed, it gets cleaned up. So we're kind of adding a virtual drag data property with on this element that points to the current video, so that when we drag this li onto this UL can look up the video and then add it to the, add it to the right place, or add it to the placeholder data. So this UL, let's talk about how we get that to listen to when drags are dropped on it. So that's what this is going to do. We can listen to when a drag is dragged over this drop point by saying this is a drop point, but we want to know when a drag is over it. So that's why it's drop over. Drop out means kind of like the drag has left this drop point, and drop on means someone let go of the drag on this drop point. And what I want to do is call add drop placeholder and say where I want the placeholder within the list of videos, the playlist videos. I want it at the first position, and I want to get that drag data from the drag. Drop is called, like if you were to manually bind on a drop event, I'll show this. If you were to manually bind on a drop event, it gets called with the drop and the drag. So what I really want from this event that's being dispatched, this drop event, is the drag. And that is the second argument. I'm going to make a helper that, given the drag, gets back the drag data, which is the video, and basically passes the video to add drop placeholder. And we're going to do the same thing with someone drops on. We're going to say, oh, well, get the actual drag data and pass that, the actual video, to add video. So let's see how add video would actually work then. And then we'll implement get drag data. And then we'll implement everything else.
Sounds good.
So implementing add video. Oh, this is the final one. Here we go. So add video, again, is going to take the index at which we want to insert a video and the video element. We are going to have a playlist videos. Playlist videos, this is going to be actually our array of, or basically observable list of videos that are actually been dropped previously, and we're going to add to that. Add video. Add video is just going to check, hey, did you put an index that's after or the last one? If you did, we're just going to push that video onto playlist videos. And if you didn't, if you gave an index that's somewhere else, we're just going to insert that video in that place. So connecting these things again, all we're trying to do is that when someone drops the video on, we're calling add video with the actual video. But now what we need to do is get that actual video back from the drag. So to do that, we are going to make this get drag data function. Now this should also be a helper, but there's a problem in CanJS that's about to be fixed where this can't be a helper yet, but it will be fixed probably in like another hour. So here I've got the drag. I'm passing it because that's like the third argument that drop on is called with. And drags have a drag element. And this is a jQuery wrap. This is the element that was actually being dragged. This is that li. So now we've gotten that li. And we added that drag data to it, but this is a jQuery element, so we need to get like the raw element. And then there's can data, which this is writing to, we can use that to get the actual data back that this was storing. So here I can use CanData to say, hey, get the data from the drag element. It's the drag data property, and I'm going to return this. So this is how this function works, is we're basically passing that drag, and it's able to go in, get that virtual property, and return it to add video. Now what we need to do is make it so that the placeholders also work. So add drop placeholder and clear drop placeholder. For these, I'm just going to have another property called drop placeholder data. And this is just going to be an object with an index and a video property that gets set and cleared. So add drop placeholder. Put that down here. Add drop placeholder. Let me hide this. Add drop placeholder is just going to save, given the index and the video, that data. Clear is going to just set that back to null. Now we also want add video to make sure that it is also clearing any drop placeholder data. So I could do this, or if I wanted to be fancier, I'd probably do this.
I like your fancy version.
Yeah, me too. Okay, so now we have methods that, add drop placeholder and add video that are going to interact with kind of our stateful data. Now what we want to do is compose them with that videos with drop placeholder. So that's the final step to this. This is going to be a getter that basically reads from the playlist videos, makes a copy of it, and then inserts the drop placeholder data in the right spot. So let's see what this looks like. So this is just going to make a copy of the playlist videos, right? But I'm converting it to that other form. It's like an object with is placeholder and video property. And then if we have a drop placeholder, we're going to insert that placeholder video, like an object for that placeholder video, in the right spot. And then we're going to return the copy. And this way, again, what we're doing is we can keep our playlist videos pure, if you will, until the video has actually been added to the playlist videos. So with that, if I did everything right, which is questionable, there's a lot we just did there. I feel like there's a halfway decent odds that I messed something up, but let's see. So let's look for ABC videos. Some things my daughter really likes. Now, oh, it's working, and we're hard coding. We're hard coding always add the placeholder in the beginning because we don't have sorting working yet, but it does work.
Awesome.
Awesome. Okay, so now comes, so that was there's two hard parts of this. We just did the first, and now we're going to do the second hard part. And that's to make it so that we can insert these things where we want them to be. I'm going to start with the HTML again. Well, before I do that, actually, let's talk about what that means. So really what I'm going to want to do is, instead of drag drop events, what I want to do is translate those into, like, this is going to, where I'm going to consider this a thing as sortable. I'm going to say, hey, insert, I'm going to want to trigger on this, instead of drag drop events, I'm going to want to trigger insert at events that say, like, hey, insert this at position 0, 1, 2, or 0, or at 3, right? So I want to translate the normal drop events, like I'm moving over this, drop, move, mouse move kind of events, into other events that are more semantically meaningful to what this UI should be doing, what this widget should be doing. So what that means is instead of these events, drop over and drop on, I want to change those to, let me find let me cheat here and find what I wrote. I want to change that to, place these. I want to change that to sortable placeholder at. So this is a sortable event, and put the placeholder, because we're hovering, at a certain position, and it's going to dispatch an event that has an index and the drag data, whatever drag data we were dragging, we're just going to provide that on the event, and sortable insert at, and then we can just call add video with the index where this event is telling us where which index it belongs to, and whatever drag data we had on what we were dragging. So this is like really useful events that we want to create. And dropout is the same. We just want to clear our placeholder if someone leaves the drop position. Now to do this, what I want to do is just say, hey, to get these events on an object, on this element here, you just add sortable. And what sortable is going to do is essentially listen to drop events on its own, but dispatch these events. So, we can listen to them here in the view. So what I want to do is hook up a custom attribute. So in any of the template finds sortable, we're going to wire up this functionality. All right, how to do this? That's a very good question. Well, the first thing to know is that there's a can view callbacks module, and that allows you to listen to whenever a custom tag is matched or a custom attribute. So here, what I want to do is say, hey, anytime sortable is found, get me that element, and I'm gonna create a sortable can control on that element. Can controls are super useful for when you're just dealing with DOM stuff. So I'm gonna use a control here, going old school.
Yeah, like it.
But with old is new again sometimes. Still really useful, can control. So I want to make a sortable control that's going to like listen on this element, what the sortable element is for those drag drop events, and then translate those into the other type of events that we really want. So what this looks like a little bit, fill it out more in a second, is I want a sortable can control, and I'm going to listen for when move is called, when drop move is called. So as I'm moving the mouse over, I'm going to try to fire different events, and then as drop on is called, when it's actually dropped on, I'm gonna pretty much do the same logic in both cases. I'm just firing different events. So I'm going to implement this fire event for drop position. That's basically just going to fire the custom events that we were looking for, but it's going to look at the element's children and figure out which index you would be doing the insert at or putting the placeholder at. So this function is a little bit long because it's doing some DOM things, but I'll walk through it. Woo! So it's just barely bigger than the window.
It might even fit if you
I just like deleted a line.
Or, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so close, right?
Boom, right there.
Yeah. Okay, so again, this takes the event that happened, the drop point, the drag object, and the event name that we actually want to dispatch. You can use jQuery to trigger custom events. So I'm going to be triggering those sortable insert ats or sortable placeholder ats. That's the event name. And I'm going to be triggering at the right index and whatever drag data the person's dragging. So I'm going to do that same thing to get the drag data here. So I'm going to say, can data get me from my drag, the drag data, got it. That part's easy. Getting the index is the hard part. To get the index, I'm getting all of those UL's children. And what I'm basically doing is using where the mouse position is. If the mouse position is less than halfway down the element, that's what this is figuring out. The element's position vertically plus half of its height. If the mouse position is less than that, that means you should have been inserted at that element. So whatever the index of that element is, that's what we're going to trigger as our index of that element. Now, if you got all the way through this and didn't return, well, there's only kind of two possibilities. One is that, well, there were no sortables.length because there was nothing in the playlist originally. So we're just going to say index of 0, insert there. And then otherwise, the mouse is actually below the last element, like halfway through the last element. So we're just going to say the index of kind of the kind of one more than the last item in the list, basically the length of the list, which I would be left the length of the list. That's where we want to insert it. So then we trigger there. So these just trigger those events. So we're just listening on drop move and drop on, and then just running through the same logic, but just dispatching different events. Make sense?
Yep, makes sense.
Cool. So with that, I think it should work. All right. Okay, let's see. Hooray. So you can see it's a more sophisticated sortable would like probably work where the person grabbed would work based on what they're dragging. I just did it on the mouse position, so I didn't have to do even more DOM calculations, but it works. Sweet. All right, so
that's pretty slick.
Thank you. So one final thing, and then we're out of here. So, oh no, two quick things. One thing is I want it so when if I don't drop, I want a nice little animation that reverts. It's like, oh, you didn't drop it, fine. We're gonna move you back, the video back to where it was. If you call revert on a drag object, it will run that animation at the end of the drag lifecycle. So what we really need to do is there is a drop end that gets fired at the end of a drag motion, even after drop on. And this can just check like, hey, if you weren't dropped on, revert the drag. Well, when you were dropped on, you were dropped on. So I'm going to set that to true. And then what I want to do is anytime a drag motion starts, I need to set back dropped on to what it used to be. So I'm going to do that. So drop init is when, you know, the drag life cycle starts, but you do drop init because you're on a drop. So you want to listen to kind of when any of this kind of life cycle is started. If you did drag init, again, it would start making this sortable element draggable itself. So that's why you listen to drop init. But we set it to false, and now we should get reverting.
Cool. Is revert part of jQuery++'s
Yep.
API?
Yep.
Cool.
All right, so now the final thing. We've gone through all the hardest parts. Now let's do one last little thing, which is to make the save playlist here. I guess there is a little bit of interesting stuff here, but all I'm going to do is I want to say, hey, if we've got at least one video in our playlist, have a create playlist button. A create playlist button that's going to call create playlist. and then it's going to be disabled if this create playlist promise is pending.
I really like that way of making sure that it's only clicked once, because that promise is going to be pending as soon as you start creating the playlist.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So that's what I need to implement, is this create playlist. It's going to set this create playlist promise. Again, some of the stuff I would probably do a little bit differently with streams now. But, and then when the playlist promise is resolved, it needs to clear the list of playlists so we can start creating a new one again.
It might be cool to do a similar, or do like a follow-up guide that kind of points out specific places where streams could improve things.
Yeah, so what's more advanced than advanced? Because I would need like
expert or
expert guide. Yeah, we could do
something like that. Yeah,
we could do that.
Advanced with streams.
Yeah, yeah, with streams, something like that. I'm totally happy to do something like that. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create that playlist promise property. I am then going to create the create playlist function, and this again is a doozy, but don't worry. Most of it's just like dealing with YouTube's APIs to create things. So this is going to prompt someone for what they'd like to name their playlist, because I didn't want to actually like add even more functionality to this example. So prompts them, gets the playlist name. YouTube, unfortunately, doesn't have a single API that allows you to create a playlist and add all of its items all at once. So you have to create the playlist and then add every single item all with a separate request.
Wow, that's surprising. That seems like it would be a pretty common thing if their API only allows you to create playlists.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, it's probably what the use case they had in mind, but I wanted people to be able to create playlists without not necessarily having to save them.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It doesn't work that way, so it's kind of lame, and you have to do it all serially, every request. So I create the playlist. That's what this does, right? Takes the playlist name, calls playlist insert, a description, and then I need the playlist ID out of this. And then what I do is this trick to make it so I can issue serial requests that all, fire off or run asynchronously, is I do this trick with promises that I basically loop through each playlist video. When the last promise is done, I make a request to insert the new playlist item in my playlist. So here's the video ID, here's the playlist ID I want to insert into. So whenever the previous promise is done, then I run the request to insert a new playlist item, a new video. And because I return that, which is a promise, this promise here will only resolve when this inner request is done. But then the next loop of the each, that becomes this last promise, and now this is waiting for that. So this is a way of like serializing a bunch of promises to run after each other serially and wait. And then, now because we fix this, last promise. We had an issue because Google's promises weren't actual promises, so CanStash wasn't working with them correctly, but we fixed that since I've made the guide. So you can actually just return the Google promise, and we work with that fine now. Cool. So then once all of those are done, I just return that last promise. I think I did just, I got to set that as, I set that as create playlist promise. And then what I need to do is once this promise is actually done, I want to clean up the state and set my playlist videos to empty, make sure that the playlist promise doesn't exist anymore. And I do this back in my init where I do all my kind of messy event binding. So here when the playlist promise is, when I actually have a promise, when it's set to something, when this changes, if it's set to a promise, I wait till that promise to finish, set the playlist videos back to empty array, and clear the playlist promise value. So with that, I'm going to sign out. It'd be really meta if I can add my own video to, like, that I'm making right now to my playlist. I really hope I can. I don't know if it's gonna. I doubt it's gonna show up in my search results. Oh.
Yeah, there we go.
Oh my God, we're gonna break the internet.
Yeah.
Hold on, everybody. We might break the universe. Might break right now. Okay, I don't need to get crazy here.
Yeah.
Okay, let's try. Let's see. Oh, disabled. It worked. All right, now. Wow. So now, if I go to YouTube here, I should be able to see that. Let's go my channel.
Are you going to
playlists? Oh, this is a private playlist. It makes them as private.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So I'm gonna go to Video Manager, Playlists. Oh my gosh!
Yeah. There we go.
All right, that was a fun one.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So yeah, that's it, everybody. That was I really love this example, mostly because it really gets into, I think, a place where people struggle with, which is how do you, at some point, there's the DOM. The DOM exists, right? And there's a lot of functionality in the DOM, like where elements are located and their positions and stuff like that, that just doesn't translate to that pure view model perspective. And how do you deal with that? Well, my traditional answer is custom events, right? That sortable placeholder at, sortable insert at, custom events is I create a control that kind of sits on top of it. Listen, can be all the messiness of the DOM. It can like listen, mutate elements, all that stuff, move things around, drag, drop, whatever. All of that can happen all, gross in this little corner.
Yeah.
And it translates what's going on in the DOM into nice events that like your view can then wire up to your view model. And that ugliness can be tested on its own. It can be, the nice thing about it is it can be applied everywhere. I can just add drag drop events. I could add a new sortable and start listening to those events in other creative ways. It can be mix and matched. It fits in. It's got a high potential for reusability when you build things that way. And it keeps your view models clean, your views clean. I'm a big fan of that. So
yeah, for sure.
I'm glad we've had a video teaching that.
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever seen as good of an example of creating custom events and dealing with the messy DOM stuff, but still having that readable in your templates through the event system.
Yeah. I don't think I've made one.
Yeah,
it's a good example. I mean, I'm sure stuff like that in like old school CanJS, like 1.0. But then once components came around, we just showed doing stuff with view models and views, and there's a. Unfortunately, I feel like people don't build apps the way that they used to. Like everybody wants to build very square apps without drag and drop and very simplistic UIs, which makes sense in some ways because like that's what users expect and they haven't seen drag drop very much, so they might not be used to it. But I love those kind of interactions.
Yeah, it depends on if it actually fits like business use cases, because sometimes that's just like a messier UI. But for something like reordering a list, it just makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that CanJS is particularly good at handling those situations because of can control, because of its tight jQuery integration. Mm-hmm. When you have to like mess with the DOM and deal with the DOM, there's a lot of things there that can help you do that.
Yeah, for sure. Also, cool. I feel like CanView callbacks isn't used as frequently as it should be, because that's a really, really handy tool for not creating components when you need them.
Well, what it's good is it's kind of like a mix-in, right? There can only be one element, right, or one tag name, right? There's a component, and yeah, you can put components inside of each other, but that's that element's behavior.
Yep.
You can have as many attributes as you want on an element, so it's really good for that kind of mixing in stuff.
Yep, for sure.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you for joining me, Jason.
Yeah, for sure.
Thanks everybody for watching out on the interwebs. I guess I should look.
Yeah, look here.
That was fun. I had my hangout on the right. So this was fun. Add suggestions for what you want to see next. I'm thinking either a login, log out form, which of course this kind of thing did, but like a sign up registration or sign in, just how to build those, or a credit card authorization form, like with validations, maybe stuff like that.
I think the validation one would be pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So until next time, until CanJS Widgetry 4, Justin signing out. Thank you again, Jason.
Thanks, Justin.